brought to you by Charity Mobile, the phone company that supports life and family. 5% of your monthly plan price goes to your favorite charity. Buy the way you believe at CharityMobile.com and use promo code TRADITION. During Lent this year, I took a break from bringing you the works of Pope St. Pius X, specifically Pascendi, and now we return to that examination of his landmark encyclical against the modernists. It's essential for understanding where we are in the church, how we got to this place, and the problems we've had in the church for decades that existed before Jorge Bergoglio became Pope Francis. So today we return to Pascendi. We're going to talk now about the evolution of doctrine. Here he teaches us how doctrine and the concept of the development of doctrine are twisted by the modernists to then sell you, the believer, on any weird ideas they may have gotten into their heads, and how they then turn those ideas and try to sell them to you as being Catholic. Pascendi, Pope St. Pius X, on the evolution of doctrine. To finish with this whole question of faith and its offshoots, it remains to be seen, venerable brethren, what the modernists have to say about their development. First of all, they lay down the general principle that in a living religion everything is subject to change, and must change, and in this way they pass to what may be said to be, among the chief of their doctrines, that of evolution. To the laws of evolution, everything is subject. Dogma, church, worship, the books we revere as sacred, even faith itself, and the penalty of disobedience is death. The enunciation of this principle will not astonish anybody who bears in mind what the modernists have had to say about each of these subjects. Having laid down this law of evolution, the modernists themselves teach us how it works out. And first, with regard to faith. The primitive form of faith, they tell us, was rudimentary and common to all men alike, for it had its origin in human nature and human life. Vital evolution brought with it progress, not by the accretion of new and purely adventitious forms from without, but by an increasing penetration of the religious sentiment in the conscience. The progress was of two kinds: negative, by the elimination of all external elements, such, for example, as a sentiment of family or nationality, and positive, by the intellectual moral refining of man, by means of which the idea was enlarged and enlightened while the religious sentiment became more elevated and more intense. For the progress of faith, no one causes are to be assigned than those which are adduced to explain its origin. But to them must be added those religious geniuses whom we call prophets, and of whom Christ was the greatest, because in both lives, in their words, there was something mysterious which faith attributed to the divinity, and because it fell to their lot to have new and original experiences fully in harmony with the needs of their time. The progress of dogma is due chiefly to the obstacles which faith has to surmount, to the enemies it has to vanquish, to the contradictions it has to repel. Add to this a perpetual striving to penetrate ever more profoundly its own mysteries. Thus, to omit other examples, has it happened in the case of Christ. In him that divine something which faith admitted in him expanded in such a way that he was at last held to be God. The chief stimulus of evolution in the domain of worship consists in the need of adapting itself to the uses and customs of peoples, as well as to the need of availing itself of the value which certain acts have acquired for long usage. Finally, evolution in the church itself is fed by the need of accommodating itself to historical conditions, and of harmonizing itself with existing forms of society, such as religious evolution in detail. And here, before proceeding further, we would have you note well this whole theory of necessities and needs, for it is at the root of the entire system of the modernists. And it is upon it that they will erect their famous method of theirs called the historical. Still continuing the consideration of the evolution of doctrine, it is to be noted that evolution is due, no doubt, to those stimulant styles needed. But if left to their action alone, it would run a great risk of bursting the bounds of tradition, and thus, turned aside from its primitive vital principle, would lead to ruin instead of progress. Hence, studying more closely the ideas of the modernists, evolution is described as resulting from the conflict of two forces, one of them tending towards progress, the other towards conservation. The conserving force in the church is tradition, and tradition is represented by religious authority, and this both by right and fact. For by right it is in the very nature of authority to protect tradition, and in fact for authority, raised as it is above the contingencies of life, feels hardly or not at all the spurs of progress. The progressive force, on the other hand, which responds to the inner needs, lies in the individual consciousness and ferments there, especially in such of them as are in most intimate contact with life.
Note here, venerable brethren, the appearance is already of that most pernicious doctrine, which would make of the laity a factor of progress in the Church. Now it is by a species of compromise between the forces of conservation and of progress, that it is to say between authority and individual consciences, that changes and advances take place. The individual consciousness of some of them act on the collective conscience, which brings pressure to bear on the depositories of authority, until the latter consent to a compromise, and the pact being made, authority sees to its maintenance. With all this in mind, one understands how it is that the modernists express astonishment when they are reprimanded or punished. What is imputed to them as a fault they regard as a sacred duty. Being in intimate contact with consciences they know better than anybody else, and certainly better than the ecclesiastical authority, what needs exist, nay, they embody them, so to speak, in themselves. Having a voice and a pen they use both publicly, for this is their duty. Let authority rebuke them as much as it pleases. They have their own conscience on their side, and an intimate experience which tells them with certainty that what they deserve is not blame, but praise. Then they reflect that after all there is no progress without a battle, and no battle without its victim, and victims which they are willing to be like the prophets of Christ and himself. They have no bitterness in their hearts against the authority which uses them roughly, for after all it is only doing its duty as authority. Their sole grief is that it remains deaf to their warnings, because delay multiplies the obstacles which impede the progress of souls, but the hour will most surely come when there will be no further chance for tergiversation. Or if the law of evolution may be checked for a while, they cannot be ultimately destroyed. And so they go their way, reprimands and condemnations notwithstanding, masking an incredible audacity under a mock semblance of humility. While they make a show of bowing their heads, their hands and minds are more intent than ever on carrying out their purposes. And this policy they follow willingly and wittingly, both because it is part of their system that authority is to be stimulated but not dethroned, and because it is necessary for them to remain within the ranks of the Church in order that they may gradually transform the collective conscience, thus unconsciously avowing that the common conscience is not with them, and that they have no right to claim to be its interpreters. Thus then, venerable brethren, for the modernists, both as authors and propagandists, there is nothing stable, nothing immutable in the Church, nor indeed are they without precursors in their doctrines, for it was of these that our predecessor, Pius IX, wrote, "These enemies of divine revelation extol human progress to the skies, and with rash and sacrilegious daring would have it introduced into the Catholic religion, as if this religion were not the work of God, but of man, and of some kind of philosophical discovery susceptible of perfection by human efforts. On the subject of revelation and dogma in particular, the doctrine of the modernists offers nothing new. We find it condemned in the syllabus of Pius IX, where it is enunciated in these terms. Divine revelation is imperfect, and therefore subject to continual and indefinite progress, corresponding with the progress of human reason, and condemned still more solemnly in the First Vatican Council. The doctrine of the faith which God has revealed has not been proposed to human intelligences to be perfected by them as if it were a philosophical system, but as a divine deposit entrusted to the spouse of Christ, to be faithfully guarded and infallibly interpreted. Hence the sense, too, of the sacred dogmas is that which our Holy Mother the Church has once declared. Nor is this sense ever to be abandoned on plea or pretext of a more profound comprehension of the truth. Nor is the development of our knowledge, even concerning the faith, impeded by this pronouncement. On the contrary, it is aided and promoted. For the same counsel continues, "Let intelligence and science and wisdom therefore increase and progress abundantly and vigorously in individuals and in the mass, in the believer and in the whole Church, throughout the ages and the centuries, but only in its own kind, that is, according to the same dogma, the same sense, the same acceptation." That's Pius IX explaining the evolution of doctrine. Note the claim, he says, the modernists make, that they are to be the interpreters of the popular will and the popular understanding of faith, while then also admitting quietly to themselves that they have to impose their own view on the popular will and the popular faith, thus no longer having any claim to understanding the popular will, and instead having no claim to having the right to be the interpreters of it. They know nothing of the faith. They know nothing of what the faith teaches. Instead, they seek to just simply impose their own understanding on the Church. It's modernism. This is what we resist, because the modernists eventually took control of every single one of the highest offices in the Church and have held them consistently since the late 1950s, and actually earlier than that. But I'm curious what you think about this. as you can tell from my going over it, the document isn't exactly the easiest to read. It's why we're doing this in small portions. I already have the full document recorded several years ago in full on this channel. But I find personally that the smaller portion reading of this is probably easier for people to understand. But let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. And hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.